So we're going to bring our next panel up. And our next panel is focused on something that I actually come from an economic development background. And economic development's about jobs. And as I have immersed myself here at the Friedman School for 2.5 years, I can't help to think about the people who serve our food, who make our food, who grow our food, who process our food. And all the time I'm listening to the conversations about how are we thinking about the people in this food supply chain. So I was very excited to be able to put a panel together today of people who I deeply respect, who each have a different part of understanding of the people in the food supply chain, not the eaters, the doers, the makers, the growers, the servers, the people who really make it all happen. So please come down and join us, our panel. We got Rakim, we got my Andre, we got Catherine and Tim. Come on down. Andre, we'll put you down here at the end. Come on, yeah, I'll get out of the way. And Andre's gonna ask each panelist to introduce themselves, but I do have to selfishly do a little mini intro of my own for one of the panelists. And that's Dr. Catherine Newman. And so Catherine's right here. So Catherine became the provost of UMass Amherst in 2014. Oh my God, I'm getting choked up talking about this. I'm gonna miss you. So it got announced yesterday. Catherine's at the UMass president's office, and we used to work together, and she's just been a marvelous friend and mentor to me. But she's been named the provost of the University of California system. And so you're not going to be with us, and I'm going to miss the dinners, and I'm going to miss, but we're still going to have a lot of phone calls and advice and all sorts of moments. But I'm just so honored that as one of your last moments here with us in Boston, you're here on our panel and literally an expert in what you do. And so this is a fabulous panel, and thank you. So Andre, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? All right. So first I want to apologize. I lied earlier when I didn't raise my hand. In addition to being the executive director of Skillworks, which is a workforce development funder collaborative that works to improve the workforce sector and to make sure we eliminate racial wealth gaps through workforce development, I'm also the chair of the Somerville School Committee. So I was in government through COVID. And so I just wanted to echo the Honorable Mayor's point that one of the reasons I do philanthropy for my day job is that things government simply isn't good at, namely preventing problems, because democracy doesn't incentivize it. You don't get votes for the bridge that doesn't collapse. You don't get votes for the system that never fails. So that's why we need people to do that preventive work, because politicians won't lead there. With that, I'm going to go ahead and allow all our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with the new provost.
Well, thank you so much. I think I was invited here not because of any of these long-winded administrative titles, but because in my real life as a social scientist, I've spent many years studying the low-wage labor force. That's really what my expertise is in. And I wrote several books that were focused on people who worked for what I called Burger Barn. Will not shock you that the Golden Arches closely aligned with their lives. And I was interested especially in social mobility off the bottom of the wage floor. So I don't know if you want me to go into that now or you want us to each just introduce ourselves.
We'll do the intros first and then come back to it.
But I think that's why I'm here, because I've studied the labor force at the very bottom, which in this instance happened to be in the fast food industry.
Next we have...
Hey everybody, I'm Tim Griffin. I'm the division chair of Agriculture, Food and Environment. So I'm near my office today on the first floor. And I think Katie and I talked about this. I think the reason that I'm here, and the students in the room certainly already know this, is I've been involved in agriculture at the farm to ranch level for my adult life. So more than 40 years. And connections in my family going back much longer than that, with all kinds of farms, big farms, little farms, crop farms, vegetable farms, dairy farms, beef operations, ranches, all of that. So the point that Katie was making and that others have made about the people in the food system, that's my connection. That's my personal connection. It's my personal interest. It's always good to admit you're biased, right? I'm biased to people who grow food, and that doesn't include just people who own land to grow food. It includes everybody that does that. So I'll talk about that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rakeem Morris, co-founder and CEO of Our Work. Our Work, our vision is to create a liquid universal workforce for hourly employees, which is a fancy way of saying that we want people that have been trained at places like McDonald's and like Taco Bell be able to return back to their former employer. It's credentialing the on-the-job training that is often lost when that hourly employee leaves that workspace. And with these skills that they're learning at these employers, we want those skills to stack over time to open up new job opportunities for people that work hourly jobs. And our mission is to save the American dream for 80 million hourly workers.
Fantastic. I'm actually going to start with Tim because you're at the start of the chain, so that seems like a good place to start. Um, and actually, also feeds nice to the video we just watched. But it feels like America has this sort of love-hate relationship with agriculture and agricultural jobs. On the one hand, we romanticize it, we subsidize it heavily, we talk make a deal of it. But on the other hand, when you talk about like jobs Americans won't do, a lot of them are agricultural jobs, etc. So can you talk about that tension and some of the challenges it may raise?
Yeah, and you'd mentioned you were going to ask me that, so I spent the last hour like trying to figure out how I was going to answer this.
You had questions in advance. I didn't get any questions.
Just kind of in passing, but anyway, I mean, I think I think we'll talk about innovations and how we make change eventually in our panel, as the other panels have done. This one, though, is a way like to put a mirror up, because I think as a society, we certainly have this tension. But what it made me think about is like, do I do that? Do I romanticize certain aspects of the food system? Like it's noble to grow food if you're growing local food and it's going to the farmer's market, but it's not noble if you're doing it in the Central Valley or the Salinas Valley of California. So I think that when we start thinking about how do we change, part of it is, and this is about the eaters, it is about all of us, is what is our perception of what that kind of work looks like? And is it really different than if I own a farm in North Dakota or I pick berries in Salinas? And I did science for a long, long time, and I still do, but I'm more and more drawn to like, how do we think about the people that are involved in the system? And we can talk about government change, advocacy, business, supply chains, value chains, all of it. But we also have a responsibility to take a look at like, how do we perceive the system? So I think the tension that you raise is super real. You see it societally across all kinds of venues, that certain things in agriculture are held up like this. And certain of them, I wouldn't even say that they're thought of lowly, they're just ignored. It's like, it's totally invisible to us, and we can continue to have it be invisible if we want to. So that is something that we, as individual people and people who eat food, that we all need to be thinking about.
There's an interesting challenge. So, Catherine, I think you and I both come from this interest in low-income workers, particularly now you're emerging from COVID, and we had this period of where these workers were considered essential. Are we seeing new trends? Are we seeing for our low-income food workers, be they servers, agriculture workers, what have you?
Well, let me start by describing what the jobs were like when I first began studying low-wage workers. At the time, my colleagues in economics and in sociology were principally interested in poverty as it was connected to the welfare system. And I was never interested in the welfare system, and I'm not to this day. My interest was in people who work all the time and still don't clear the poverty line. And when I began studying them in Harlem, which is where all of this research was done when I was a faculty member at Columbia University, these jobs were minimum wage, had not seen a meaningful increase in decades, led nowhere, were high turnover, low opportunity jobs. When I went back to study the very same people 8 years later, 1/3 of them were no longer poor at all. 1/3 had moved up significantly but were still struggling, and 1/3 were still below the poverty line. No one in my profession expected to see that degree of upward mobility. No one. And the reason why it happened was that by the late 1990s, labor markets had tightened. Now, I became interested in the phenomenon of tight labor markets themselves much later. In fact, just finished a book that's going to come out in the spring, which is called Moving the Needle: What Tight Labor Markets Do for the Poor. But I was observing it on the ground 8 years later when I went back to study the same people, because by that time, they were benefiting from the fact that there were very tight labor markets. In the beginning of my study, the ratio of people applying to receiving those jobs was 13-1 in Harlem. The very same job out on Long Island was way better paid and occupied by teenagers. In Harlem, these were jobs held by people who were trying to raise a family on those minimum wage jobs. The long-term lesson of this is that the conditions of the labor market have everything to do with what these jobs provide or can vault people to, which is why the work you're doing is so important. The kinds of skills that can be developed are completely portable. They have application in many other parts of the economy that are better paid, but they will not emerge in the lives of these folks unless labor markets tighten and there are opportunities to create job chains between the entry level and the levels that exist above them. Most of us in this room, certainly I, had crappy jobs when we were teenagers. I mean, awful jobs. And it is not a sin to have an awful job. It is a sin to get stuck in an awful job. And getting stuck is what happens when we have a large surplus of unemployed people and no real opportunity to move. But it does happen. And in fact, speaking of the post-COVID period, we are experiencing the tightest labor markets in 52 years. What does this mean? The kinds of people I was studying now get sick pay, vacation pay, college tuition benefits. $15 an hour is now more or less the rule of the game. It's not something we have to campaign for anymore. Now, I'm not minimizing the impact of inflation and all of the things that people have to deal with. That's very serious and very real. But it doesn't always happen. In the Clinton years, when I was doing my original studies, there was no hint of inflation. We had high growth, low inflation, extremely low unemployment, and that kind of perfect weather makes a huge difference for low-wage workers. It provides opportunities for upward mobility. The big challenge in my mind is less about engineering those jobs, because quite honestly, I came to the conclusion it was not possible, it wouldn't happen. The big opportunity was figuring out, as you said, how to capture the skills that have been gained and create opportunities for mobility chains beyond this entry level. And there are ways to do that, which I can come back to later. But I guess my overall message is that the quality of the jobs that we're concerned about in the food industry have everything to do with the economy that surrounds them. And that can be good news or bad news, depending on what that economy looks like.
Thank you for queuing up my question for Rakeem, which is, you've told us about our work, but can you really tell us about, like, what are you trying to do? What are these challenges for hourly workers and the stackable credentials?
Yeah, for sure. I'll go over my personal story.
Please.
We went over in the call beforehand. So I'm from upstate New York, and I have a longer version of this, but I can go with a very short version as it leads, especially to what we're chatting about today. From upstate New York, single parent family. My mom, her employer, gave her an ultimatum, told her that she needed to move her afternoon nursing shifts to mornings or find a new job. When that happened, I began bringing my little brother to school every single day. He was 10 years younger than I am, still is 10 years younger than I am.
He hasn't caught up with you yet?
What's that?
He hasn't caught up with you yet?
No, well, no, yet. He hasn't jumped in the time machine either. Okay. I was out of school when I was 14 years old. I dropped out of high school because I began missing my school because I had to work. And over the next 10 years, I worked about 13 hourly jobs, often working 2 or 3 at a time to make ends meet for me and my family. I eventually went back to high school when I was 18 and graduated from Cornell 5 years later, then worked at GE and Google and my MBA from Harvard. And had this company now for 5 years. And so I'm really pleased with that. I'm also thinking about the question that you asked in terms of the stackable certificates. So one of the things that surprised me was that in my last week at school was also my last week at Kinko's, and I was getting paid $7.50 an hour in Ithaca, New York. My first job I got 10 years before that. I started at $7.25 an hour, and so my wages did not increase over the course. I lost my purchasing power over the course of 10 years because of inflation. And if I was able to credential the skills I had learned in those jobs, I would be able to create that well, first future end vision for me, and also for my paycheck to increase over time, given the fact that I'm walking into new jobs over the course of these 13 jobs that I had with skills that I have brought from my prior jobs, whether it's arithmetic from being a cashier or the customer service I was from being a waiter at a restaurant. When I walked into the job at Kinko's 9 years later, I was a consummate hourly worker pro. And as a result of that, I should have, you know, because my productivity was greater, that should be recognized in hourly workers' paychecks. And really, that's the foundation for this company, is to be able to create these certificates that represent these skills that hourly workers have, and again, have them be able to manage them like a portfolio and be able to mix and match them to open up new job opportunities. In the same way that a investor diversifies their portfolio by getting different bonds, stocks, and whatnot, I want hourly workers to do that with the skills that they have and create that same type of insurance in their lives and for their families as well.
Thank you. So as Tim pointed out, we are going to talk about innovations, and I think this is actually a really good place to start. One of the things we often say at SkillWorks is there's no such thing as a low-skill job. They're just skills that employers don't think they should have to pay for. Um, and so I'd love to really, since both of you have mentioned this issue that like there are lots of skills being done in the food sector that are transferable. So I'd love to talk about innovations about that, but I'd also like to talk about making sure that the jobs, again, that are essential, and how do we innovate to help those jobs be jobs people can live on and live with dignity on. And that's just everyone.
Let me take a crack at this. In my day job, the one that comes with all those long titles, one of my responsibilities is to develop online education opportunities for people at the front lines of these low-wage jobs. Because the upskilling process, when it is credentialized, and especially if it's credentialized by educational institutions that are recognized by employers, can definitely lead toward better employment opportunities. I'll give you an example, which is only tangentially connected to food service, but UMass Global, which is our adult education online division at the University of Massachusetts, has created a program with Mass General Brigham, whose purpose is to provide frontline workers who do not have any college at all with the opportunity to develop credentials, usually certificates, that skill them up and give them the chance to move into patient care, which is far better paid and represents, again, a mobility chain within an institution, which is within the hospital structure. The hospitals are crying out for people. There are thousands of openings they can't fill. So what they're trying to do is work with us to develop an internal labor pool that has those credentials marked within it and recognizes not only the skills they gain at the front line, but provide them with new ones. There are lots of opportunities for that kind of internal skill development, but it does need to be credentialized, not only because employers internally want to recognize it, but because another employer somewhere else needs to be able to recognize it. So I think there is a healthy innovation system to be built between higher education, training institutions, institutions like yours, and employers that will help employees find their way to mobility chains. I would say once again, this is going to sound like a broken record, there is no time like a historically tight labor market to do that, because the employers need this. When they don't need this, I'm sorry to say, they are not all that altruistically inclined to invest in it anyway. But right now they do need it, and $19 billion a year is being spent by employers in the United States on tuition assistance programs, and most of them are directed toward this kind of practical credentialing for adult workers who may well enjoy the kind of philosophy courses I took once in a while, but are principally driven by what kind of credential will help me get a better job or advance in the job I'm in. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity out there, and we're all working on that.
Yeah, feel free to. Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing innovation in the same ways that you described at the level of farms, including new ways of producing foods. So could be, you know, containers, vertical farms, glass houses, all of those kinds of things that, as was pointed out, none of the work that I'm thinking of right now is unskilled, and some of it is really highly skilled. and allowing for innovation, whether it's on an individual farm or, as you mentioned, the development of programs which could come from almost any sector, private, nonprofit, or government, to continue to provide opportunities for learning for the people that maybe start at an entry-level job. But, you know, if you own a business like that, if you own a farm business, for example, that you want to take advantage of the creativity and use the creativity for the people that work there. And I've worked with farms that do that, and I've worked with farms that definitely do not. That it's, you know, it's your job to just go prune the apple trees. That's it. I'm not asking for your creativity. I'm asking for you to prune the apple trees. There's lots of levers that we can think about to make that much more systematic. And one of them, I mean, most of us realize there's been a lot of mechanization in the agriculture sector, and we think about machines, robots, software replacing people, and that's one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is, when we do those things, what are the opportunities for that person to now contribute to your business in another way? And there's lots and lots of those, and some of them require, you know, maybe longer term educational aspects, but some of it could be much more rapid training within, I'm thinking specifically within agriculture, but also maybe the steps that are just after agriculture, whether that's distribution. In the livestock sector, is it things like slaughter and processing, which is still a lot of human power, also fairly invisible to most people. There are opportunities there if we choose to take a hard look at what those opportunities might be. And that would be, again, across government, either supported training, but regulatory aspects, businesses, and nonprofits.
Your answers are well. I want to build on both of what I'm hearing here. I'm also dying to read your book, especially giving some of the things I've seen in my business. So what we do is we
And current federal policy. I'm really excited to read your next book.
Yeah. It is the worst labor economy of our lifetime. Labor participation rate is at a 45-year low. Rent inflation is at an all-time high. People that work these jobs are being crushed on both ends. They're not making enough income, and then also the things that cost a lot normally, like rent, is going through the roof. And then all the other stats on labor are also the sharpest labor decline in productivity since literally the 40s or 50s. And what I'm seeing is a lot of employers, we target quick service restaurants in our platform. We're at about a third of all McDonald's in the country. I'm just seeing for the first time benefits that they're offering. And the exciting thing is that we have all this information about the hourly workers and a bit about their demographics as well, including any of the other things they're sharing with that employer. And one of the fascinating things that I've been seeing is that when we're able to craft these, let's say, benefit packages based on what that hourly worker would likely need, we're getting a higher increase in the application rate to our restaurants in our platform. And it's for the first time that they're giving benefits to these hourly workers. We've been in this game for 5 years, and it's really as a result of the pandemic, and I'm really excited about what is to come.
How we do for time?
We could have questions from the audience if we want. We do have a little bit of time, and if not, we can also, these guys, if there's another round of questions you want to do. Other questions from the audience that people would like to ask of our panel about labor? Oh, we do.
Because I can make one up. That's not a problem.
No. Yeah, I know. Right there. Oh, yeah. There you go.
So we were talking about innovation, and more than once in the past, innovation had led to automation. And I was wondering, this kind of automation, which came up in your talk, that machines take over the work in the fields and in the orchards. Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? And if it is a bad thing, what are you going to do about it?
You personally. Maybe I can take a crack at that, not in the fields, but I'm going to turn it over to you. So one of the reasons I was really interested in studying fast food workers as a student of the low-wage labor market was that at the time, McDonald's was the largest employer in the United States outside of the military. I mean, it was huge. And if you're talking about teenage workers, it was by far the largest employer. And I thought, okay, these jobs can't go anywhere else, right? Food has to be prepared where you are, and it has to be consumed where you are. So this is not vulnerable to offshoring. It's not particularly vulnerable to offshoring, but it is definitely vulnerable to automation. You know, those of you who didn't go to an airport for 2 or 3 years during COVID, by the time you go back, there's virtually nobody working in the airport because it's all machines, it's all iPads taking your orders. The amount of labor is so small relative to what it was in the past. So yes, the risk of a higher wage, more opportunity economy is that it drives automation. Now, what does that mean? For workers, what it means is that the premium to upskilling is very high because the jobs that are most vulnerable to automation are the most repetitive, I mean, that's what can be automated. So what you need to do is make sure that these tuition assistance plans and other forms of upskilling enable that workforce to move up into the people who repair the iPads or fix the computer program or, you know, whatever it is needed to run a more automated supply chain, because it is really difficult to stop that. I would say the other issue, and I was thinking about this when I watched Winston's video, the other tripwire here is immigration. It breaks my heart to think that that ginseng farm is going to disappear if one person decides not to go there, because I can think of thousands standing outside the gates of the United States that would love to work on that ginseng farm and turn it into something, you know, hugely even more productive. We have encouraged automation and stopped immigration, which means we aren't benefiting from the growth in that human capital that could come into this country. We are merely resting with the people we already have, and those people are declining in number, right? We've had low birth rates for decades now, and they're not getting any higher. Meanwhile, there is a large number of people who would like to be able to make that ginseng farm work. So those two tripwires, automation and immigration, remain as policy questions that I think we fluctuate around constantly. We don't have a common view. We don't have, and it becomes a political football of tremendously negative proportions. Let me turn it over to you for the solution.
Oh, oh great. At the farm level, I'll give kind of a related example to what was just mentioned, and that's, so one of the areas that I've worked in for many, many years is the dairy industry, including dairy farmers. Spent a lot of time there. And one of the new technological entries into dairy farming is robotic milkers. And we're seeing these now even here in New England on just small, what we would think of as classic New England family dairy farms, including small organic farms that only milk 50 cows and things like that, right? And you think, well, why do they need to automate the milking process? Well, anybody ever done this? Like milk cows?
Oh wow! Look at all the
Super.
people.
Yeah, this is a hell of a group. Okay, I mean, it is skilled. Like whoever is there could be a migrant worker, could be the owner. Like, you need to pay attention to the fact that this is biology in front of you, right? And you're in the milking parlor and you're doing this. But it's repetitive. It can be dangerous in various ways, especially just working around 1,600-pound animals. But where we're seeing some of the robotics come in is not to come in and then replace all of the people. It's allowing the people to pay more attention to like what's going on in the system. Now you might, granted, I think you'd end up replacing some labor, but the labor and the mind power that's still there is focusing on things that really matter, rather than, I think of automation or mechanization as what are the most repetitive and most dangerous steps in the production of a product at a farm or a ranch. And there would be a real good reason to try to automate or mechanize pieces of that to make people more safe. But I don't buy into the end result of that always has to be that now there's no longer people there. It's that they can be doing other things that increase productivity, profitability, efficiency, all of those that are more skilled than maybe what they started doing as kind of an entry-level job on an operation like that.
Yeah, I was I was on the commission, one of the commissioners, one of 17 in the Future Work Commission for the state of Massachusetts. We went to all these universities and towns in town, heard a lot of hearings, and the one that I want to cite here is my time at MIT with their staff. This is the first industrial revolution in which there is no low-skilled labor being created as a result of advances in technology. And so the types of work that you're talking about that you get harmed by doing them because they are the lowest of the low jobs, those are disappearing, and the jobs that are appearing are those that you could be much more efficient if you have a good understanding of software and automation in order to make yourself as an individual much more productive. And that's where we're going in the short term. It is the case in the long term. The objective of capitalism is to get the labor cost to zero. And that's what's driving all this automation. And so there is one day that there will be close to no jobs. I don't know if it's in our lifetimes, um, which is why we've heard all this conversation or all this talk about UBI. I believe once we get 100, 200, maybe many more years down the road, that the way that we will all be able to live and have happy lives will be to work for one another. We get so much purpose in our life from work and not from the opposite, which is leisure and consumption, which is what you would do otherwise if people just gave you money. It is work that gives us purpose in life and creates these social structures, and working for one another and creating our own communities and developing them is the answer that I see long term.
Andre, we have a question online, so I'm going to offer a question here that we got from an online viewer. Remember, there's a whole viewing audience watching this. So, can Catherine comment on the opposition between the need for tight labor market and opportunities to utilize immigrant labor force?
Yeah, it's a complicated titration, and interestingly enough, there was an article some of you may have seen in the New York Times about Geoffrey Chaucer. Did any of you see this article? Oh, so this is a matter of controversy. We'll set this controversy part aside, but what was intriguing to me was that in the 1300s, when Chaucer was writing, he was sued, it turns out, because he enticed a worker to leave the house she was working for to join his house, because this was a period in which the Black Death had, taken out a third of the population and created extraordinarily tight labor markets, so much that legislation led to restrictions on moving people from one house to another, and that's what Chaucer was being sued for. So it tells you this story about tight labor markets is very, very old indeed. And one of the constant solutions to it has always been immigration. And at varying periods of time, that has been titrated properly so that we let in immigrant workers who were eager to take up the jobs, either the jobs that Americans didn't want or the jobs Americans weren't qualified for, right? We have a very high rate of immigration from India. Those are mainly highly skilled workers who are basically feeding our tech industries, and without them, the tech industries would collapse. So immigration is an important piece of this, but I don't want to ever make out that this is simple, because when you do expand immigration too quickly, you end up with wages dropping, and that is a serious issue. But I do believe there is an effective balance there. It's one that the European Union has been struggling with for the last, 20 years or so, trying to figure out how you mitigate the tensions that come from increasing migration at the same time that you feed labor markets that need to be fed in order for the economy to be productive. What isn't productive is slamming the door and pretending like we don't need additional human capital, because we do. Otherwise, we end up with farms that don't have people who are going to take them into the next generation, and we end up with labor shortages that are driving up prices and driving down efficiency, because we actually don't have enough labor to serve us. So I don't want to make out that it's a simple thing. The online question is a very, very good one, but there are plenty of smarter economists than me. I'm not even an economist. Who can help us understand what the right titration is.
So I work with a lot of economists.
Help yourself.
I would say smarter than you. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is the time that we have. That was phenomenal, you guys. Thank you so much. Which way you guys are going to go here? I know, it's a tight squeeze. Thank you. And Andre, thank you so much. I want you all to know, Andre called him in to facilitate at such a last minute. I found him on LinkedIn. It was one of those like serendipitous moments. Or I looked at my husband and I said, hey, Andre and I have a LinkedIn friend in common, and you're friends with that person, so can you text Jill Griffin real quick and find out how I can get in touch with Andre? And I emailed you, and you emailed back so fast. And so thank you so much for joining us. I forgot to mention at the beginning, Andre is the executive director of SkillWorks here in Boston at the Boston Foundation. And I really hope you come back because I think you have a lot of connections at SkillWorks that we should be talking about.
I'd love to.
Awesome.